Want to run Ubuntu and a Windows 10 VM? It's about to get a lot easier. Microsoft announced their enhanced version of Ubuntu 18.04 for Hyper-V. Also, who contributes the most to open source? Which companies, which organizations? Today we're going to take a look at the numbers. Getting the most out of your Chromebook. The latest version of Chrome OS lets you run Linux apps. Also, are you one of those people that's still running Windows 7 because you refuse to move to Windows 10 for whatever reason? It's time to start preparing the switch. And by the switch, I mean the switch to Linux. Some Linux gamers playing Overwatch were recently banned and then unbanned by Blizzard. These are 5 stories that today I will be taking into account. And the first story on the docket tonight is Ubuntu and a Windows 10 VM. It just got a lot easier thanks to Microsoft of all people. So this article over at OMG Ubuntu, written by Joey Snedden, and as always, I will of course link to all the articles discussed on the show in the description. So reading a little bit from Joey Snedden here, well, it just got easier to run Ubuntu on Windows 10 as a virtual machine, and it's all thanks to Microsoft. Windows 10 Pro users are now able to spin up an enhanced Ubuntu virtual machine directly from the Hyper-V Quick Create tool. So, Windows 10 Pro users. That's not entirely true. There are a couple of other editions of Windows that will allow this, just very quickly. Windows 10 Enterprise, Professional, or Education should all work for you. Also, it mentions that you create this using the Hyper-V Quick Create tool, going to Microsoft.com here, showing you some images of their Quick Create tool. It sounds just like, well, it is what it sounds like. It's a quick create tool. It spins up a VM rather quickly and, pretty simple. Not much to it. Anyway, why is Microsoft doing this? Well, basically because a lot of people run VMs these days. A lot of people use virtual machines. And a lot of people use Linux virtual machines on Windows hosts. Microsoft knows this. So they're trying to make it a little easier to, this is really why Microsoft created their Windows subsystem for Linux, is they know that some people need to use Linux, even, in a Windows environment. So anyway, reading a little bit more of the article here, the bootable Hyper-V image of Ubuntu 18.04 comes with XRDP pre-configured to support enhanced session mode out of the box. Now that sentence, that was a mouthful. Okay, the bootable Hyper-V image of Ubuntu 18.04 comes with XRDP. XRDP is Microsoft's RDP, it's a remote desktop protocol, and it supports their enhanced session mode. The enhanced session mode, think of that as guest editions in VirtualBox. Enhanced session mode is going to allow this VM, this Hyper-V. Now, you're going to be able to get your seamless mouse and keyboard sharing, between the host machine and the virtual machine. You're going to get your shared folders between the host machine and the virtual machine. You're going to get clipboard support, so you can share a clipboard between your host machine and the virtual machine. And of course, it's going to give you the dynamic desktop resizing. So it's going to give you, your full screen resolution of that VM. So think of enhanced session mode really as VirtualBox guest editions, if you're familiar with how VirtualBox works. Alright, so aware that many developers and IT admins on Windows rely on virtual machines to run Linux on Windows, Microsoft decided to roll up its sleeves and work with upstream XRDP and implementation of their RDP protocol, Microsoft's RDP protocol, to iron out the kinks. So again, Microsoft, they know a lot of people use Linux VMs on Microsoft Windows. They're making it a little easier. Microsoft, of course, now is all in with Linux and open source. They're kind of embracing the open source movement, at least publicly. So anyway, Hyper-V. Hyper-V is this native Windows hypervisor. Hyper-V, hypervisor. Basically, a hypervisor is a virtual machine. That's what a hypervisor is. To use Hyper-V on Windows, you need, again, Windows 10 Enterprise, Professional, or Education. For most of us, that's going to be Windows 10 Pro. You have to have Windows 10 Pro, basically. You can't have Windows 10 Home. It's not even available. This is not something you can go download. If you have Windows 10 Pro, you have Hyper-V on the system. If you have Windows 10 Home, you don't, and you can't go get it. There's no image to go download or executable to install this Hyper-V. You just can't get it. You have to be on Windows 10 Pro. All right. You also have to have a 64-bit CPU, 4 gigs of memory, because the VM, of course, is going to need some memory, and then you need enough memory also for your host machine running Windows 10, which is going to require some RAM. So that's what you need. Why not just use VirtualBox, Joey asks in the article here. And that's a good question. I personally would use something like VirtualBox or VMware or KVM or whatever hypervisor you've already are used to using if you've been using, virtual machines before. But for those that are not familiar with any of these hypervisors, such as VirtualBox or VMware, then Hyper-V might be a way to go because, again, it's already on your system. It's already on Windows 10 Pro by default. It's not enabled by default. You have to go into some settings thing and turn it on. Yeah, you have to turn Windows features on or off right here. Anyway, but it's on your system already. There's nothing to install. You just enable it and Hyper-V is ready to go. But honestly, it's not a very mature product. VirtualBox is very mature. VirtualBox is going to get you the best experience as far as a VM. VirtualBox or VMware or KVM, much better experience than Windows Hyper-V. But if what you're trying to do is, if your needs are kind of simple, there's not much, you just basically want Ubuntu to boot up and maybe, run some stuff in the terminal, yeah, Hyper-V is probably all you need. And then we've got some information here how to install 1804 on Hyper-V. I'm not going to go over that, but of course, I will link the article. And the second story on the docket tonight is who contributes the most to open source? Now, this question comes up over and over again, and depending on exactly how you look at the numbers, the answers are different. So today I want to share with you an article that I found over at Tech Republic. So this article written by Matt Asay, and of course, again, I'm going to link to the article in the show description. Who contributes most to open source? The answers will definitely surprise you. Microsoft gives the most open source projects based on volume of contributors. So we have known this for a while. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring up an older article. So he mentions number of contributors. If you take the number of contributors from a company or organization, and this has been done many times in the past, by far, Microsoft contributes the most to open source. Their employees that are contributing to open source were 4,550. This article from InfoWorld, I'll link to it, was published back in February of this year. So Microsoft, 4,550. That is a huge number of Microsoft employees contributing to open source software. Second place, Google. Now, Google, of course, does a lot with open source software, but look how far behind the gigantic, multi-billion-dollar company Google with just 2,267 employees contributing to open source. That's still a huge number of employees. I don't want to diminish what Google does with open source, but that is crazy how many people Microsoft. It still blows my mind that many people at Microsoft are contributing to open source. I bet it kind of blows your mind too. So I give Microsoft a lot of flack on the channel because the company has been so antithetical as far as, what it means to, be free and open source. For decades, Microsoft has kind of been the evil empire. They've been the enemy. But you know what? They do contribute a lot to open source products. So we have to give them that. Anyway, this is the standard list you always see. Microsoft, Google, Red Hat has 2,000 employees contributing to open source. IBM, Intel, Amazon, SAP, ThoughtWorks, Alibaba, and GitHub were the top 10. Now, GitHub now is actually part of Microsoft. So, actually, this would change a little bit. Actually, number 11, I'll mention one more. Facebook contributes to open source. Yeah, that mind blown on that one, too. But anyway, this guy at Tech Republic, Matt Asay, he's going to measure this a little bit differently. He's going to not look at the number of contributors. He wants to know the percentage of your company, the percentage of your organization. So, Microsoft may have 4,500 people contributing, but how many people work for Microsoft? What percentage of Microsoft is contributing to open source? So, reading a little bit here from his article, by at least one measure, Microsoft is the world's top corporate contributor to open source, with more than 4,000 employees actively contributing to open source projects on GitHub. Microsoft has nearly doubled the number of contributors of open source heavyweights like Google and Red Hat. I've already shown you that. Anyway, he's going to take a look at the numbers slightly different. Let's break it down by percentage. The percentage of your employees, what do they contribute? Mozilla just blows everybody else out of the water with 39.9%. 39.9% of Mozilla contributes to open source. That's 40%. So 4 out of every 10 people at Mozilla contribute to an open source project in some form or fashion. That is insane. But you would expect that. That makes a lot more sense than a company like Microsoft. Mozilla is all in with open source. 40% though. Mozilla is a huge organization. They're going to have, people, doing all kinds of stuff, clerical work and accounting, they've got legal teams and, just office worker, standard, janitorial people. The fact that 40% of Mozilla contributes to open source is mind-blowing. That is crazy. Good job, Mozilla. I mean, wow. Rounding out the top 10, Pivotal, 18.2%. SUSE, 17.64%. Red Hat, 12.68%. Unity Technologies. Unity, of course, is behind the Unity game engine, so that's that company. Square, you guys know Square, the little Square devices. That is very shocking that they made the top 10. 11.25% of the people working at Square are contributing to open source. That, you wouldn't think open source would, that's not their game. As far as a company, Square, that's strange. ThoughtWorks, 8.28. Shopify, 7.67. Okay. ESRI, 6.87. And rounding out the top 10, Microsoft, 3.1%. So those 4,500 employees that contribute to Microsoft, that's 3.1% of their people. So still puts Microsoft in the top 10. However you measure it, though, you do have to give Microsoft props, whether you measure it by total number of contributors, where they're number one, or percentage, where they're still in the top 10. That's still a pretty big deal. Reading a little more of the article, another result that stands out to me is Pivotal with its second place position. Yeah, I didn't mention Pivotal, but there it is. Pivotal, 18.27%. Given its proprietary provenance with VMware, it's significant that so many people at Pivotal actively contribute to open source. So Pivotal's VMware. It's not open source, but you know what? They kind of contribute to a lot of open source stuff. 18.2% of their people. Well, and I already mentioned Square. Matt here in the article mentioned Square, Unity Technologies, the game engine. Anyway, I thought these numbers were interesting because I've seen this chart here so many times before about total number of contributors and that, Microsoft and Google, but doing it by percentage of the company. Microsoft still makes the top 10. Google did not. So anyway, and Mozilla, wow, I'm still blown away by that. 40% of Mozilla. And the third story on the docket tonight involves Chromebooks. Really, it involves Chrome OS. The latest version of Chrome OS now lets you run Linux apps. So this article from over at Gizmodo, this article written by David Neild, get more out of your Chromebook by running Linux apps. I'm going to read the first paragraph here. Chrome OS itself, based on the Linux kernel, Chrome OS is based on Gentoo, can now run Linux apps. The circle is complete. If you've got the latest version of Chrome OS and a fairly new Chromebook, you can now install some of the best applications Linux has to offer. And then he's going to go into detail how you do this, how they manage to do this. It involves Crostini. Crostini is a way of running Linux programs in a container, basically a containerized sort of environment, almost like a VM, or maybe those of you familiar with things like Snap Packs, Flatpaks, those sorts of things. Anyway, one of the key selling points of Chromebooks has always been security. This containerized feature still maintains that because, if something is compromised in these containerized packages, it won't affect the rest of the OS. Crostini was also how they managed to, I believe, get the Android apps working on Chromebooks. So Chrome OS has your standard Chrome OS apps on it. Now you have the ability to run Android apps on it. You've been having that for a little bit. Now you have the ability to run proper Linux desktop apps on your Chrome OS device. How cool is that? I mean, that really makes Chromebooks, I mean, if they weren't already selling like hotcakes, you know what? I might have to get me one. I gotta be honest. I've been thinking about getting one anyway, but that's a game changer. It really is. The fact that I can get all my apps now. So think about it. No more of all these web-based apps. I mean, early on with Chromebooks, that's really what you had, all these web applications. But you know what? You can't do everything with these web applications. And even when you got the Android apps, okay, so now I got some mobile apps, for my laptop. But now, now I can get all the stuff I normally use. LibreOffice, GIMP. If I want to change web browsers, I don't want to use Chrome, I want to use Firefox. I can do that now. Something you couldn't do before. So, reading a little more, Chrome OS has no doubt improved a lot since its debut in 2011, and part of the improvement relates to speed and capabilities of the apps we've now got on the web, including offline support, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, programs like GIMP, LibreOffice, etc. And checking compatibility for those of you wanting to see if your Chromebook device or your Chrome OS device supports this, you need to go to Help and then About Chrome OS. And you need to check the Chrome OS version. If it's version 69, yes, 69, or later, then you're good to go. Then choose Settings from the Chrome menu, see if there's an option labeled Linux Beta. If there is, you're good to go. So how do you install apps? Well, you know what? You're installing Debian apps, by the way, the containerized package. Even though Chrome OS, oddly enough, Chrome OS is built on a Gen 2 kernel, the Linux apps that they're using are Debian packages. Kind of strange, but that's what they've chosen to go with. It makes sense because Debian-based distros are the most popular Linux desktop distros. Anyway, you're going to find a lot more Deb packages out there than, Gen 2 packages, so it makes sense. From the screenshot here, you install these packages the same way you would on Debian. You open up a terminal, you need to do a sudo apt-get update to sync the repos, and then sudo apt-get install GIMP, sudo apt-get install Firefox-ESR. That would be the Firefox you can install on Chrome OS, or sudo apt-get install VLC, etc., etc., LibreOffice. Pretty cool stuff. That is really just a complete game changer. Not every app is going to run smoothly, this article warns. And of course, this is, even though it's beta, right? As a matter of fact, I believe it's going to say that in the menu when you go to About Chrome OS and look at the version number. It's going to say Linux, and then in parentheses, it's going to say beta. So it is kind of beta, but it's going to get there pretty quick. They're going to get to the point where pretty much anything that runs on Debian should run on Chrome OS. Reading the article a little further, remember, this is still very early days. This is a period of time in software development where stuff starts happening and stops happening for no apparent reason, and where you might end up rebooting more than you normally would. Linux apps can start and stop working with each successive Chrome OS update. So they're already warning you, even if you install something now and it works great, don't be surprised if the next Chrome OS update breaks it. So it's just something. Now, Chrome OS is really becoming a very mature desktop operating system and laptop operating system in the case of the Chromebook. So when it first came on the scene with all just the web apps, it was useless to somebody like me. Once you added the Android apps, it becomes a little more usable. Now that I can do all the Linux desktop apps, I get all the apps that I want to, that I normally use, to do all the work I need to do. That is a game changer. The only thing that the Chromebook is missing, and it's probably coming within months, is gaming. Now that Chromebooks, we're going to start seeing more and more powerful Chromebook devices on the market. Some of these devices will be capable of gaming. And with Steam Play, don't be surprised if you don't start seeing Steam Play on the Chromebook very soon, within 6 months. So Chromebook, I got to admit, they're becoming more and more appealing, and I may just have to pick me up one in the near future. And the fourth story on the docket tonight, are you one of those people that's still running Windows 7 and you don't plan to ever make the switch to Windows 10 for whatever reason? You need to start preparing to switch to something soon. Windows 7, it's eventually going to reach end of life. You need to start making preparations for the switch. And the switch you need to prepare to make, really, if you're not going to Windows 10, you need to start preparing the switch to Linux. So over at ghacks.net, this article written by Martin Brinkman, Windows 7 to Linux, preparations. So he mentions this is the first part of a series of articles he's going to write about how to migrate from your Windows 7 device to a device running Linux. The main motivation behind this series of tutorials is to provide the Windows 7 users with instructions to migrate to a Linux distribution and not to Windows 10. So I do know for a fact, because I've talked to a couple of them, a lot of, there's people out there that run Windows 7 because they do not want to ever use Windows 10. They don't like Windows 10 either as an operating system. They see it as inferior to Windows 7. They like the Windows 7 experience better. A lot of them don't want to move to Windows 10 because they know about the privacy issues involved with Windows 10. Windows 10 basically has spyware installed on it. Microsoft pretty much admits to this, that, they're basically tracking everything you do on your machine, and basically it's basically spyware. Where Windows 7 at least initially wasn't, but for those of you that are holding back on moving to Windows 10 from Windows 7 because of the spyware thing, you guys really need to be aware. Windows 7, of course, has been updated many times since Windows 10 has come out, and they've already backported all the spying and all that stuff into Windows 7 anyway. So if what's holding you back from Windows 10 is the whole spyware stuff, you probably already got it on your Windows 7 installation anyway, so really you need to get off of Windows 7 ASAP, right? As soon as possible. So support for Microsoft 7 or Windows 7 operating system, it's scheduled to end January 2020. Enterprise customers, they're going to get extended support because already people are complaining that they never want to move from Windows 7. It's like this really with each Microsoft Windows version. You're always going to get some extended support for business customers. So Microsoft would like for the bulk of Windows 7 users to migrate to Windows 10, of course, or buy a new device and use Windows 10 on that. But for most users, that's the case. But again, for a lot of people, they say they can't ever see themselves moving to Windows 10, and the news keeps getting worse. You see, like with Enterprise, moving to Windows as a service eventually with Windows 10. So if you're on Windows 7, in a business environment, you may not be just itching, jumping at the thought of moving to Windows 10, because then you may end up eventually getting locked into paying for Windows as a subscription. Something I wouldn't be crazy about. I doubt most Windows users would be crazy about. Anyway, the best option if you don't want to run Windows 10, what better time to explore a free and open operating system like Linux? Now is the time. So let the preparations begin. What do you need? Well, the first thing you need to do before you switch to Linux is you need to figure out which version of Linux to choose, right? You need to figure out what you want to go to. From Windows 7, if you've never used Linux before, ever, the first thing I would suggest is checking out his suggestions in the article, Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Manjaro, and Zorin. I like these first two, Linux Mint and Ubuntu. I really like those two. For a brand new user, Manjaro, I would not put on a brand new to Linux user. That's a bad idea. That's a rolling release distribution. It's based on Arch Linux. I run Manjaro. I love Manjaro. It's my favorite Linux distribution. I'm using it right now. Not for a brand new Linux user. Zorin's okay, but it's, kind of a smaller niche kind of distribution. Ubuntu really is the best thing he suggested here. Linux Mint, I don't mind that. So I would stick to Mint or Ubuntu for those wanting to check out Linux for the first time. If you're just coming over from Windows, other things you need to consider is whether your programs, are they available on Linux? Those programs you're used to running on Windows. Many of them will be. Chances are on Windows you were already running some free and open source software anyway. You might have been running things like Firefox, Thunderbird, VLC, LibreOffice. Of course, those are all going to be available on Linux. Now, some Windows-only programs, though, exist. Things like Microsoft Office, you're not going to get on Linux. There's no Linux port for those. That could be a deal breaker for some, especially in a business environment. The Adobe suite of applications, things like Photoshop, they're not going to be available on Linux. Those, again, for some people, may be a deal breaker. You also need to consider how to migrate your data over to Linux, basically because you're going to wipe out your existing operating system, Windows 7. You need to start thinking about backing up your system, backing up all your data for when you do this fresh install of whatever Linux distribution you choose. You need to consider whether Linux supports a certain feature that you need. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that too much. Chances are we've got you covered. You need to consider if you need antivirus software. You don't need antivirus software in Linux, so you're good on that. I'm not sure why the author of this article suggested that if you need antivirus, you won't. If you're running Linux, you're good. No viruses. How to properly secure your system. Basically, it's the same way you properly secure your system with Windows if you were properly securing your system. Obviously, avoid shady places on the internet. Be good with your passwords, strong and complicated passwords, firewalls. You can do all that same stuff that you were doing on Windows and Linux. And matter of fact, Linux usually does them better. You can get a much more secure operating system running Linux. The article goes into great detail about how you burn an ISO to a USB stick so you can try out Linux for the first time. You can try Linux without actually wiping out your hard drive or doing any permanent changes to your machine. You can actually burn something like Ubuntu to a flash drive and then take that flash drive, plug it into your computer, reboot the computer, and you will run Ubuntu off that flash drive. It won't touch your hard drive, it won't touch your Windows installation at all, but you can play around in Ubuntu running off that flash stick. See if you like it. If you don't, take that flash drive, put a different version of Linux on it, and try that one. And keep trying that until you find one you think you like. And if you want to, go ahead and install it on your machine. Just make sure again that you have all your data backed up. You're good to go. The article mentions data. He mentions data backups. Use something like Paragon Backup. I've never heard of that one. I'm assuming it's a Windows program. But if you're moving to Linux, you need something that's cross-platform. He mentions Clonezilla. I like that as an option. That is not a bad option at all. So anyway, just something you guys that are still on Windows 7, if you're still on Windows 7 and you've already decided you're never moving to Windows 10, and I know there's some of you out there, you really need to start considering the move to Linux. Because for whatever reason that you don't want to move to Windows 10, it's not going to get any better, right? If you hate the desktop experience with Windows, it's not going to get any better with the next version. If you hate all the privacy and security concerns with Windows 10, it's not going to get any better with the next version of Windows. You know where it's going to get better? Leaving Windows behind and coming over to Linux. So, all right, and the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is recently some Linux gamers playing Overwatch were banned and then later unbanned by Blizzard. This caused, quite a little stir on the internet for good reason. By the way, Blizzard has kind of had a history. They don't really like to support, they don't want to support Linux at all. And there have been instances like this in the past where people trying to play these Windows-only Blizzard games using Linux with things like Wine or, any other kind of wrapper, have been banned by Blizzard. So reading this article from Jason Evangelo over on Forbes, caution, playing Overwatch on Linux may get you banned, and then he's got in parentheses updated because there have been a few updates since this story broke a couple of days ago. Some Linux gamers playing Blizzard's Overwatch are on the receiving end of the ban hammer today, and it's suspected that the DXVK, a compatibility tool that hooks into Wine to translate DirectX 11 to Linux-compatible graphics, API Vulkan, may be the source of the problem. And that almost certainly is the source of the problem. These people are running Overwatch in Wine using DXVK. And for some reason, Blizzard has these anti-cheat, bots and programs out there, basically seeing what you're running on your machine. And if it sees anything that it deems, kind of strange, shouldn't be there, they assume you're probably cheating, you're a hacker, you're using, whatever, aimbots or whatever on whatever game. And they end up banning you. And, these bans, usually, if they determine you're a cheat, these cheat bots get you. It's a permanent ban, you lose your account. It's frustrating, especially when you did nothing wrong. The only thing you did was you were running Linux. So, Reading a little more, this is an issue worth highlighting because gaming on Linux has become much more visible in the mainstream. A lot more people are using things like Wine, especially now with the Steam Play news. A lot more people are going to use the Proton wrapper. So you're going to see more and more people trying to game using Linux as their main OS. And it's frustrating when companies like Blizzard are making that difficult. The article here mentioned prominent YouTubers like Linus from Linus Tech Tips, and Wendell. You guys know Wendell from Level 1 Techs. They've been highlighting a lot of gaming recently about the new Steam Play because it's big news. You guys have been reading about it on Phoronix. The Steam Play news is huge news and one of the biggest stories in Linux, certainly this year. So you see all the news about Steam Play, how Linux gaming is really starting to get where it needs to be. And then you read a story like this. Now, how this came about, how this story broke is, I guess over on Reddit. Somebody posted, hey, I just got banned. I wasn't doing anything. I'm playing Overwatch using Wine. And then very quickly that thread, I guess, got filled with other people that claimed the same thing. Blizzard did look into it, and eventually bans were overturned. So update number 1, the Redditor who originally posted this issue has received the following response from Blizzard. So this is a direct quote from Blizzard. Quote, "Sorry to hear that your account has been banned. I'm going to escalate your ticket so our team can take a closer look and hopefully overturn the ban and give you some feedback so we can avoid this happening to other Linux users." So they looked into it and determined, the guy wasn't cheating or anything. He was just, running Linux and Wine using DXVK. And so anyway, another user reported the same response from Blizzard. Blizzard seems to be taking care of all the people that were banned. They all got their bans overturned. Blizzard, though, is not telling people what caused the ban. They won't go into specifics. They don't want you to know because it again, a lot of this was because of their anti-cheat bots, I'm sure. They don't really want people to know what triggers it. So, final update here. True to its word, Blizzard's dev team looked into the issue and responded. They informed me, I guess the article author, that all the bans have been overturned and comments on the original Reddit thread seem to back that up. So everybody that complained on Reddit, they're all good now. Everybody, they got their bans overturned, no problems. So Blizzard explained that they're unable to share in-depth details about the ban, so they won't tell you exactly what caused the ban, but at least the bans were overturned. This has kind of been a problem with Blizzard in the past, especially with their anti-cheat stuff, is it does sometimes catch Linux users. Blizzard has never really supported Linux. I'm not much of a gamer anyway, but I personally would not give money to a company like Blizzard anyway. For the last decade, Linux users have been asking Blizzard to support Linux. They don't. And even when you go out of your way to play their Windows-only games, using things like Wine, you end up, getting banned, sometimes permanently banned, your account locked, whatever money you dropped on that game. Hopefully you get the ban overturned. Otherwise, you're out some money unless you happen to have a Windows machine to play it on and can get the account back. Who knows? But anyway. And that was the 5th and final story on the docket tonight. So that is Taking Into Account episode 9. Again, I release Taking Into Account every Thursday. This is a weekly show. I release it every Thursday. I don't have a set time of day every Thursday I release it, but I release it sometime every Thursday. And as always with Taking Into Account, other than the 5 main stories, I like to end the episode with reading a viewer question or comment. So I've got this question over on Mastodon. Those of you that are not following over on Mastodon, check me out. You will find me DistroTube at mastodon.technology. Anyway, hi Derek, and greetings from the UK. I've been watching you on YouTube and am a subscriber. Thanks for all the great content. I see you like using tiling window managers. I've never used one. I've got 2 old computers that don't run a desktop so well, and was thinking a tiling window manager may be a lightweight and better option. Plus, I like to learn. If you don't mind me asking, what are your thoughts, and which distro and which tiling window manager would you recommend for a noob to tiling window managers? I'm okay with Linux in general. He's just a noob to tiling window managers. Cheers. Cheers to you. All right. So, now there's a couple of things I want to address with this is he mentions he's got some older machines that don't run a desktop so well. They don't run the desktops you've tried so well, because chances are you tried things like GNOME, KDE, maybe XFCE, Mate, LXDE, LXQt. Those are all fine desktops, but they are not as light as some more obscure desktop environments. So if I go over to distrowatch.com, and if I take a look at their top 100 page hit rankings, I'm going to show you a couple of distros that have full desktop environments that basically can boot up with like 200 megs of RAM. Full desktop environments. The first one I want to show you is Bodhi Linux. Bodhi Linux runs the Moksha desktop environment, which is based on Enlightenment. You don't need to know what that is, but you know, Enlightenment is very, very nice. It's a very pretty distro, very lightweight, very minimal. Again, you know, you pull up HTOP in this thing and it's using 200 megs of memory or less. Very, very nice distro. Should run on any machine. If this machine is capable of running any graphical desktop environment, it should be capable of running Bodhi Linux, another very, very lightweight, but still a full desktop environment. Q4OS. This particular Linux distro uses the Trinity desktop environment. And the Trinity desktop environment is basically an old fork from KDE 3.5 many years ago. So a really old version of KDE that, you know, if you've got a machine that's 10, 12 years old, the machines from that era were probably running KDE 3.5 if they were running Linux. So Q4OS is another one to take a look at. So Bodhi and Q4OS for, you know, if you're looking for something for full desktop environments, but still really, really lightweight. If you want window manager only and don't want to go tiling, because tiling, there is a learning curve, think of OpenBox. OpenBox is a floating window manager, and there's some really nice OpenBox distros out there that are already pre-configured for you. You don't have to write any config files. You don't need to be a programmer or a developer or anything. If you want something that's rock solid stable, take a look at Bunsen Labs Linux. Bunsen Labs is basically Debian stable with the OpenBox window manager already installed and configured for you. It's already got a panel, the menu system's already configured, it's got some really neat tools already installed, it's got, you know, Conky on the desktop that tells you, you know, some key bindings that are already been set for you. You're good to go. Now, that said, you mentioned in your Mastodon post here, your toot, that you did want to learn though. So tiling window manager, you mentioned you kind of one of these guys that want to try something new and want to learn. So you probably do want to try a tiling window manager is what I'm going to assume. And what's a good first one? The one I always recommend for a brand new tiling window manager or user is i3. I'm not an i3 user. I mean, I kind of know a little bit about i3, but from what I've played around with it and what most people tell me is it's dead simple to set up as far as compared to most other tiling window managers. The config file is pretty easy to write. If you can't write it from scratch, just find an i3 config from the internet and just borrow it from somebody else. Somebody's got one posted on GitHub for you. So i3 is probably the one I would suggest you start out with. Another one that I would suggest because I love it is Qtile. Qtile is full featured. It is written entirely in Python. So Python, if you know any programming languages at all, Python's pretty easy to maneuver around in. So Qtile might be one you take a look at. With Qtile, you have the advantage too of I've actually got a couple of videos on my channel about Qtile, so that may help you out setting up Qtile. This show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, David, Leor, and Rob. These are my highest tiered Patreon supporters. These guys, they're the producers of the show. This would not be possible without them. The show is also brought to you by the fine ladies and gentlemen. You see their names on the screen. These are all my supporters. If you enjoy this video, please consider supporting the channel. You will find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.